I'm Sasha Elenko, co-writer and producer on the Reconnect America podcast. This is Rail Bites, where we highlight some of the gems of what we are learning from our guests on the main show. Today, we're hearing from Dave Strohmeyer. Dave is the chair of the Missoula County Board of Commissioners and chair of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. The Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority is a government agency in Montana created in 2020 by a joint resolution of 12 counties. Its mission is to restore long-distance passenger rail service between Chicago and Seattle through the southern tier of Montana. Though people traveled by train along this route for over 80 years, service was discontinued in 1979, along with 5 other Amtrak routes around the country. The purpose of these cuts was to reduce federal spending. But as you're about to hear, the loss of this service left a deep mark on communities that suddenly found themselves stripped of a vital mode of connection to other places. It was this sense of loss that led to the creation of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. And over the past few years, it has created a groundswell of support that spans political divides. In this clip, Dave vividly illustrates the importance of passenger rail for communities and the broad coalition that has formed around its restoration in southern Montana and beyond.
Passenger rail resonates on multiple levels. It is not simply a mode of transportation to get to two ends of a linear line. It's not simply, how do I get from this intercity location to another intercity location? It connects urban and rural. In a more metaphorical sense, I see passenger rail and transportation more broadly as part of the syntax by which we weave our lives together. It is a critical part of the human experience and our existence on this planet. It is not simply an end unto itself. And by that, I mean, some folks will push back on the idea of passenger rail as this antiquated relic of the past. And we've now, in our evolutionary history of transportation, somehow moved beyond that. And our dogged determination to pursue passenger rail is simply a fixation with this mode of transportation. Yes and no. One of the aspects of passenger rail, and those who have experienced passenger rail, they know and they have felt this, and it is in their bones. So, for instance, I had the opportunity last year to ride the Ethan Allen Express from New York City up to Burlington, Vermont with my family. And it was a great trip. And part of the reason why it was a great trip was it was not just, let's get on this mode of transportation and as quickly as possible get to our final destination. It was quick enough. I mean, it was not a bullet train-esque sort of experience, but what was of value to it is I could walk down to the car on the train that served beverages or food. I could have a bite to eat. I could have a drink. I could relax, have a conversation with my family, with other visitors on the train. There's a social experience that resonates with the human experience that is not replicable in really many other modes of transportation. Certainly is not replicable in what I experienced a week or so back flying on a major airline. Certainly not what I would necessarily experience as I'm trying to navigate down an interstate highway with my vehicle. So there actually is something to be said for the experience of train travel that has value in and of itself. But it's not just about nostalgia. It's not just fixation on a type of transportation from bygone years, but it's also much more than that. When I talk about transportation and passenger rail in particular as being part of the syntax by which we weave together and knit together our lives, it is a way in which we can bring together rural and urban areas. It's a way to access services that might otherwise, from an equity standpoint, not be easily accessed by some communities, by some individuals. Here in the state of Montana, where I reside, we have a number of interstate highways, and these interstate highways connect our, relatively speaking, urban areas in our state, but also some of the most highly rural and arguably frontier areas that you would find in the entire continental United States. The reason why we have an interstate highway through these areas is not because there's such a massive metropolitan, cosmopolitan population. It's because we are connecting ourselves economically, socially to others outside of the state of Montana. So when I hear folks push back on the notion of passenger rail, arguing that there are so few people in the state of Montana, there's only 1 million people, why on earth would we ever put our energy into trying to restore and enhance passenger rail? Well, for the very same reasons that we have, as a nation, dumped countless billions of dollars into our interstate highway system. It has really little to do with the population of the specific location through which that piece of infrastructure passes, and has everything to do with creating connections from one locale to another. And even beyond the transportation connectivity, for me, this experience, this journey over the past few years in spinning up the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority and in all of the accomplishments we've been able to somewhat remarkably pull off in a short period of time, has given me a renewed hope in the United States, even amidst what are some arguably pretty dark, divisive times that we are in right now. And I do not know what is going to ultimately be the light at the end of that tunnel. I'd like to say that maybe a passenger train is part of the light at the end of the tunnel, but that's just me speaking. What I would say, though, is what this has driven home for me is that in this state of Montana, an extremely red, politically red state, a decade ago, we were a little bit more of a shade of purple. We're now pretty deep red politically, with the exception of a few blue dots here and there. But if you look at the member counties of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, by and large, these are deeply conservative rural counties, yet they have recognized that there is value in passenger rail for all of the reasons that I've just articulated. Connectivity. They might not use the word equity, but it's basically transportation equity is the underlying theme, connecting any number of our highly rural tribal communities to healthcare facilities in larger communities. Whether you're a student in one of our flagship universities or an elderly individual who might not have many other good transportation options, all of these things are values that seem to resonate across political divisions that we typically see, and that in some cases where folks might bristle at the idea of federal investment, and this is not across the board, but certainly I've seen more of an acceptance that, you know what, I might not agree with other ways in which federal dollars are being invested, but this is a good return on investment for our location here in the state of Montana. And indeed, this is not just a Montana initiative. We're talking about doing what has never been accomplished in the United States. That is restoring a discontinued long-distance passenger rail route. And this particular one would span 2,300 miles connecting Chicago to the Pacific Northwest. And if anything should give us a sense of hope and optimism, I would hope that some of these accomplishments that we've been able to pull off in the past few years would be that beacon of hope that folks might be looking for right now.
Building on that, and I don't know that we need to add any more because you spoke so eloquently to it, but part of the discovery process around rail has been that in the loss of freight and passenger rail and service connectivity that occurred starting long before 1970, but certainly, with deregulation of the railroads and the rise of globalization, there is a sense of people being left behind, literally being left behind. And that there's legitimate grievance that we have an opportunity to address by reconnecting folks to each other and to the resources, et cetera. I kind of like your vocabulary more than the vocabulary of grievance, but at the same time, it is something we're bringing up in this conversation is to recognize that people have been literally left behind and that what we're calling for is to remedy that. I mean, I'm not saying you have to speak to more to it, but if that brings up anything for you.
As I've heard from folks in the Dakotas, here in Montana, state of Washington, Wisconsin, Minnesota, you name it, but more concentrated in the areas that have completely lacked passenger rail service in the past several decades. what I hear from folks is a great deal of lamentation, and especially from those who at one point in time did experience the value of passenger rail, the ways in which it impacted and benefited main streets in small downtowns. There has been a palpable sense of loss. Maybe less of a sense for folks who arrived in these locations post the diminishment of passenger rail. They might not have understood or experienced as viscerally what once was and what could be in the future. Unless you've used passenger rail somewhere else, you might still be somewhat at a loss for why we don't have it now. But yeah, this, I think, certainly feeds the political turmoil in our country when folks feel disenfranchised, when they feel cut off from others. There can be a whole lot of blaming. There can be a whole lot of leveling of grievances against others who, whether it's real or not, might be perceived as the reason for that sense of loss or that sense of disenfranchisement. Ironically, if anyone should feel disenfranchised transportation-wise and disgruntled over the history that has played out in the Western United States, it ought to be tribal nations. And interestingly, tribal nations are at the vanguard of bringing back passenger rail service and being supportive of this. Why might that be? Well, rolling back the clock, the transcontinental railroads that spanned this country in the mid to the late 19th century were arguably one of the greatest tools of manifest destiny that destroyed tribal communities and adversely impacted tribal nations. What is happening today with that disenfranchisement of connectivity that has spun out from that long and sordid history is, I believe, the recognition that passenger rail, in this ironic twist of history, is a means by which sovereignty can be reestablished, connectivity and control of one's destiny can be reestablished. And this is a story that's still being written as we are engaging in this continental scale restoration project. We will be doing a ton of outreach to our tribal partners, and we'll be creating this vision and this plan as we go. But I think that's an example of building upon a history of disenfranchisement, but seeing this as a real and present opportunity. Another example, and this certainly would have relevance to tribal communities, but also many of the non-tribal rural communities, agricultural communities across this corridor here in the state of Montana and beyond, is looking at the opportunity to reestablish something that was called small parcel delivery. This is a service that Amtrak once provided. For a variety of reasons, it was ultimately dropped a number of years ago, but basically it was a means to ship exactly what I described, small parcels via a passenger train, as opposed to using one of the other options, UPS, FedEx, the U.S. Postal Service. And many folks found this to be a very valuable service. And what we have heard from folks in rural ag communities is that whether it's getting a tractor part or some farm implement that could be shipped in this manner, or perhaps shipping out to your ultimate market products that you are producing that would fit within this definition of small parcel, this is a valuable service that would enhance the economics of local, small, rural agricultural communities and would provide a different sort of means of connectivity, adding value to passenger rail in a way that folks might not immediately think of that.
That was Dave Strohmeyer, Chair of the Missoula County Board of Commissioners and Chair of the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. Thank you to Oda Proda for the theme music. If you liked what you heard in this Rail Bite and think more people should hear it, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also support this work by pitching in and getting involved at solutionaryrail.org.